You just got through fooling me. Although they may sound otherwise, some of the news items tonight and the stories have to do actually with man's inner state, his mind and consciousness, as opposed to other stuff. Just thought I might mention that. Due to the state of the economy, one man near had a seizure. And the next day, after the economy picked up, he near did so regarding the political conditions. And the next day, after they'd stabilized, he near did so regarding the sorry state of the arts. And the next day, after they began to show improvement, he drew near a seizure based on the dismal outlook for the upcoming soccer season. Do you get the point? Need we track him further? From a real man's view, the mind is ordinarily surrounded by two equally unacceptable choices. Life has everyone playing a role, and to never realize it fully is to stay therein forever. Analyzation without originality is like constructing a house out of other people's leftover building materials, which themselves were imaginary to begin with. The saga of one man and himself. After feeding into the program all of the available information to develop a psychological profile of the person committing the crimes, the computer returned to the detective with one name, his own. And as per departmental procedures, he placed himself in custody even though he knew he was innocent. Today's free medical advice from Old Free Doc. Lots of people believe their head's separated from the rest of them. It ain't so, but thinking it can really mess you up. If you're trapped and even a field goal is out of the question, you can always fall back on the old personal anecdote or confession play. Time, as normally experienced by man, is a product of his own consciousness. Until you realize that your thinking has always used other people's ideas, you'll never even have a clue as to what real thinking could be. When one guy heard some people discussing what they said was a new word for a new phenomenon, noise pollution, he began laughing so hard that his head finally warned him he'd better watch it. The mind is like a bird healthy enough and with two wings, but with its foot tied to an unyielding perch. And now for my private dictionary, the several definitions of unyielding perch. Collective thought, current reality, and man's hormonal spine. Only stupid people are serious, or frivolous, or expectant in the particular. They're all related, you know. Two kids were shooting hoops, and one of them asked the other one, "Who are dumbest, the humanist or the religious?" And no one replied. A trick question is no longer a trick question once you know the trick. And his left brain went for a three-pointer. While again, in the midst of living his everyday, routine life, a man suddenly thought, "God, who writes this crap anyway?" Freely given laughter is as good as a beaten out confession. Flash. Talk is even more important than you think it is. Being between a rock and a hard place, between Scylla and Charybdis, or between two Greeks in the shower, is all child sport compared to the position of man's mentation in the routine world of opinion and debate. There is more to thinking than the rehashing of what others have already thought. And while this may at first seem plain and obvious, it can be much more complex than it sounds. Think about it. Oops, see, there you go again. You don't want me to repeat that one, do you? Meditation, a road with nowhere to go. Useful meditation. Same, except the meditator knows it. To try and join in the local spirit of things, one man would sometimes sing, "When something is wrong with my baby, something is wrong with me." The only problem being that he had no baby and that nothing was wrong with him. Well, let's face it, it's not always that easy to join in, even when you try. Just check with any original ideas you may have ever had. Would it have helped if I'd actually tried to sing it? That's right, Dave was Sam and Dave is dead. So, from the middle of life's parade, little original music is heard. More facts unknown to medical science. There is a central muscle in the body which, if strained, will affect all the others. Remember, we're talking the body here. Don't be confusing it with the mind. To keep an incomplete teaching from falling, it must lean on another one. The matter of justice, archery, and the expectations of man's stereoscopic sight. Targets seem unfair, and arrows not, since those things closest to the ordinary mind seem the most vital and liable to human control. But the normally unnoticed background is equally alive and important, the realization of which totally alters one's sense of justice and balance. The mystic's automobile. If you can still put it in reverse, then shame on you. One guy so concluded, if you can count to 2, you can count to 3. And if you can count to 3, you can count to 4. And if you can count to 4, you can forget it and go on to the business of smashing your watch. Intellectually, the average individual is simply the collective scrawled small. The story of one man and his run-in. The detective drew his weapon and told the suspect to drop his and not to do anything stupid. And when he continued his threatening advance, the officer shot him in the knee. As he lay withering in blood and pain, he asked the detective, "God, how bad is it? Will I ever be able to walk again?" And the cop replied, "Nah, I don't think so. I've never seen anyone recover from a .357 to the kneecap." And the man shook his head and said, "Well, after all, you did warn me." To which the detective replied, "Yeah, but how was I to know I was serious? So don't be thanking me." And the wounded man's right brain began drawing little circles in his blood. Muzzle velocity moral. Reasonable expectations can serve the disastrous purpose of keeping you reasonable. If fair was fair, when you're arrested, life would read you your rights. It did, just after you were created. But I guess you just kind of forgot. If you recall, can I draw this again? I was discussing like the middle, to use some of my pictures, the middle of life's parade, the middle ground of life, the only part of life to which any potentially useful attention should be given, And I was describing like the middle of the parade, the middle of life, that can be described in individual ways within one's own mentation. That can be described and used as an example, a fair reflection of man collectively out in society. And I was drawing at that as like, let's call it the middle. That's where life is the healthiest at any given time by all definitions. And particularly in man, it is just a place where it is reasonable sanity. It is civilization at any particular time and place on the planet at its ad hocish height. Off to the edge you have like the shoulder of a road that you get into areas much more questionable. The middle of the road of life, again, I wish you'd keep in mind as much as possible so I don't have to keep stopping and doing it. But this is because it's useful on both levels. You might get one for 1 second, might get something out of one of them, and then just momentarily out of the other view. That is, that look at that level part as being civilization. Just what I've sometimes, to use a sociological term, the middle class. It's just where the sane, stable, law-abiding, moral, profit-making, decent men and women of the world reside. And off to the edges are the other elements, and I'm going back to what I was using last time. You could look at one of them as being like the criminal element and the other side being the insane element. But this is also true that I'm going to get into tonight, literally within the mind. It's exactly the same situation. But now consider the middle of life. What you have is it is surrounded on either side. And let me be a little more specific. I'll stick with the terms I drug up. So let's say one side is the criminal element, but now let's call it criminal thinking as opposed to insane thinking. But it's criminal thinking on this basis, that it is ideas that are always critical, condemning, sometimes even destructive. Put back into external political terms, it would be the firebrands, the Young Turks, the rebels, against whatever the prevailing order is, if we're just using the political arena, just being one part of the middle of life, the middle of the road. It is criminal in the sense that they would make radical changes, even to the point of destroying it. Whereas off on the other edge, you would have what we could call insane thinking. And that ends up being ideas that belie, defy the present state of collective reality. One of them is an attack upon the middle. Another one is like an irrelevancy toward the middle. And I could certainly make up other categories, but if you can see this in a certain way, I think it can be quite useful that you can lump all of the possible attacks on civilization and, as we're about to see in a minute, upon sane, stable, that is ordinary, limiting thought, as being like two edges, like two mountains, or I did it like valleys, like running off the road, but you're surrounded always by two sides, by two elements, two unappealing choices to those in the middle. Because see what those in the middle do. If we take the first side that I was calling the criminal element, it is an attempt for one group to intellectually mug the center of the road. And life does not approve of mugging, especially unexpected mugging. As we were noting, if you recall from last time, that the height of criminality amongst the civilized is the unexpected act of criminality. That is, that you live in a middle class or upper class neighborhood, and one night while going out to retrieve the paper or just to look at the stars, you get mugged. Under those conditions, the mugged will raise extreme amounts, greater amounts of hell and complaint and outrage than will some guy over in the poorer section of town who gets mugged. And it's not just because that the upper class can get the ear of the politicians or the press more readily. It is because it is unexpected. That is at the heart of it. But there is also an unexpected mugging that life disapproves of equally as stringently, and that is intellectual mugging. Unexpected. And one way this is handled is that life treats the areas from which the middle of the road could be attacked and mugged, it treats them generally as, on one side, the criminal element, which is easy enough, and there'd be no need for any great discussion from an ordinary view if we were talking about simply the collective external manifestations of man. That the civilized element within any group, within any society, must defend itself against the criminal element, because you have always got people who do not want to play fair, as that great philosopher. I shouldn't keep doing that. I keep finding all these great philosophers, Otis Hicks. No, lightning slim to you guys, and attributing to the University of East Texas, Bayou Branch, and nobody appreciates it, so. But even if you don't appreciate it, you should appreciate it a little bit, because he died. Okay. Some people do not want to play fair. Some people are never going to be civilized, just as when your view improves a little bit in you. No matter how clean you are, how well dressed you are, you all know. It's what makes the news. They find a man with a peerage in the House of Lords in that great motherland of Great Britain, the epitome of civility and etc. And they catch him one night hung wearing women's drawers. And they find out he's been dressing in women's underwear for years. All sorts of strange things. Or he may be a kleptomaniac. They finally find out that he has been pilfering little items from some of the finest stores in London, and it's just to the point now that they all know it, and they just send his butler a bill, and they pay for it. Within every civilized group, including a British lord, is a criminal element. They have not been weaned out of civilization, nor out of a man's hormonal system. So you have the criminal element, but collectively, society is always taking all needed measures to protect itself. That's why we have the police, that's why we have all of our laws and etc. That's why you have armies on a larger scale, to defend yourself from the criminal element, that is, that which would break down the middle of your road, the civilized part of whatever group you are in. But now if you go into your own mind, here's what you're stuck with. I know I brought up several times, I'm not sure that anyone's begun to play along with me yet and to skip along and hold the other end of the rope. So I keep laying on originality and the lack of any nourishment out of any sort of analyzation or explanations that are not based upon original thinking, pointing out how the intellectual life of man is based upon, and not even noticed, but based upon, cannibalism. The plagiarism is just absolutely, that's just a joke to say that there's something wrong with plagiarism. To be caught plagiarizing something, all it means is that what it is you're plagiarizing, whatever line, I'm not going into this, but whatever line it is that you are chewing down and chewing on the leg of some writer or now some programmer, I guess, it just means that his copyright, figuratively speaking, is running out. That his life's losing interest, and that's the only way you get caught pilfering from him intellectually. Because plagiarism is the order of the day. That is the way the ordinary mind works. Even if you don't see it in the terms I've been using, it will hit all of you, I suggest, someday just this side of the actual enlightenment, is when you understand the kind of peripatetic attempts to meditate, that you're trying to do something with your mind, or I've used terms like try to control your consciousness, and if you keep on screwing with me, I'll change it to let your consciousness loose. Quit trying to control it. And somewhere between the two, if you pursue it on your own, it's going to strike you what I'm talking about, that you're stuck, you are middle class, which is one reason that you might like to see that small-time would-be mystics, especially, and most would-be mystics have some form of talent. It's just the way it is. But then very often they turn out to be externally visible rebels. And they don't know why. It's just that internally, it's like the old story of painters, musicians, writers, sculptors throughout the years, whether they vocally claim to be interested in some great mystical tradition or etc., they do feel that they are onto something out of the ordinary in their efforts. And it's very common for them to say, well, I'm not there yet. I have not painted the picture yet. I have not sculpted the sculpture. Our writers and poets saying, I don't know what, there's something in me. I'm trying to get it out, and I just can't get it yet. And of course, what they're trying to do is reach another state of consciousness. And if they do not, then it's very common. If everyone is now, all the men are wearing ponytails and T-shirts and shorts, then suddenly you find artists somewhere begin to shave their head, put on tuxedos, and wear orange sneakers or something. And to try and offend the middle class. To go out and pee in the street, to spit on the wall, to give the finger to a priest, because that's all they can come up with. The point I'm making is they feel the strictures. They feel the confines, and they don't know where. They want to say it's in their talent. They want to say, and if they're really simple-minded, they want to blame it on the bourgeoisie. They want to blame it on the Philistines that make up the middle of the road. And of course, they're not even as perceptive as the artists I started describing to begin with, but they're the ones that say, that might bypass the point of saying, well, I have something in my soul. I have something I want to say to humanity, and I just can't seem to find it. You can't really get anywhere with that. I mean, you can do it, and if you've got a reporter that's hard up for a story and a young one never heard it before, you might get a write-up in the local East Omaha Daily Shopper or some little newspaper that local artist says he has something in his heart, and they'll get a little photograph of you going in your studio, and it says he has something to tell humanity, and he just can't quite get it out. How many people can look at that, especially the Philistines, the middle of the road people, and go, God, don't know, those artists are nuts. If you got something in you, it'll come out. It's like a pimple or diarrhea. Don't say you got something in you, won't come out. That's just that kind of crazy artistic talk. So the point is, that's not good for long. That's like a one-shot deal. Unless you move somewhere else, maybe you can put it in another state some other time. It's easier, what I was getting at, it is easier once all the artists do understand, plus all would-be mystics, and plus everyone else in the middle of the road, they understand and are trying to alter their consciousness, except they just settle for caffeine, talk, movies, rechewing other people's ideas. But those, like to the artist, those with a modicum of some talent and a modicum of interest in doing, that they know that they're, or they suspect they're onto something extraordinary, or should be, rather than saying, I have something that can't, and I just can't get it out and express it, the easiest way is to bypass all that and just operate on the basis, without even necessarily saying so, that what you have to say is already here. I mean, here's the painting stuff. And so the reporter goes, well, how come we never heard of you? Aha! And then you simply blame it on the Philistines. That is, that you have already given them the chance. That you don't whine that I've got something in my soul, this great novel that will actually pierce all of the mechanical armor around which man has surrounded himself for these many thousands of years, but now on the brink of a new century can no longer be tolerated, and my characters in a vivid and forceful manner rip away this, revealing clearly the soul of man as he will be. And the reporter says, well, when's it coming out? And the thing is, you've been turned down by every author. You've been turned down by vanity publishers. In other words, it ain't coming out. But rather than say that, all you do is blame it on, well, in other words, you're saying, I've already given the world my art. I've already given the message. I've already painted the painting. And the people go, well, how come I never heard of it? How aren't you famous? Ah. Well, you tried trying to deal with a whole damn country full, or a whole state full, or a whole city full, a whole government department full of none but dunderheaded, middle-class boobs, Philistines, people completely without any interest or taste. So that's the easy way. Now back to, I was hoping you would consider it more about yourself now. The day will come, I suggest, that sooner or later, in some way it's going to strike you, real specifically, that you are captive. And you're way past the idea of ordinary people that, yeah, I'm captive. What I want to do is be able to curse in public, or I want to be able to steal and, let my people go. That is, let me go. Turn me loose. Is that other great philosopher from Augusta, Georgia? I said I wasn't going to do it anymore. He was originally from Macon. No, he wasn't. He was Augusta, and then he moved to Macon. You figure out who it was. As he said, let me go. That is, people end up trying to be a rebel. That is, they complain about the political, economic structures, the restraints placed on artists, and etc. They don't know what it is they're seeking freedom from. If you push it far enough, if you go far enough, what I was getting to, the day I suggested going to come, that you do realize there is a basis for all these stories of people believing they're held captive, people screaming out for freedom, people saying, there's just something holding me back. It's that, and it's right here. Is that you realize, I'm to the point now, I've lost weight, I've put on weight, I've had my hair redone, I've tried all kinds of sex, I've tried all kinds of jobs, I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been, whatever it is. In other words, you feel like I have, or you realize I've gone through a fair pie slice of the general clam bake of life. Well, it all had to do with food. There's been similes that involved a greater stretch than that one, so. That it strikes you finally that I cannot think outside of a rut. That it is my consciousness, or to start with, it seems like your mind. It is my mind that is in a prison. And yet it's the very thing, you can say that, and I can even get ordinary people, perhaps a little different build-up, to go, oh yeah, I know what you mean, I've thought that. And immediately forget it, because they're not aware of it. Because they cannot go anywhere with it. And plus the mind has this great catch. 176? I was trying to improve on last time. That the mind, if you tell the mind, do you realize you're limited in what you can do? And the mind goes, no, I'm not. You have attempted, in a way, if you're going to pursue it, you have attempted to jump into a fat of Wesson oil with grease all over your hands and attempt to strangle an eel. Well, at least get a good grip on it. Or get a grip. And you tell the mind, do you realize that you keep thinking the same thing over and over? And it can say, well, no, I don't. For one thing, it can say, well, I know I don't think the same thing over and over because I never thought what you just said before. I never thought there was any possibility. And so there's something new, and I thought about it, and I thought, no, that's not true. And the proof being that no matter what you say, no matter how you approach it to the mind, or an ordinary person's mind, those of you that like it put on a personal basis, external to yourselves, to tell an ordinary mind to say, you can't think anything you want to. They go, yeah, I can. No, we've been through it, so I have to go in for it. You can do it yourself. It is, you don't have to get down. You'd actually be a bigger fool than my man in the Wesson oil trying to grip a needle to carry it any further, because you got to see it within yourself. Because no matter what you say, the mind, if it was trying to respond, an ordinary mind, back to what you're saying, it could take every attack that you gave it, such as, listen, I know for a fact, I've got secret knowledge that everyone's mind, they just don't realize it, but everyone's mind is like just in the middle of a road. They got this one rut in their mind. And they got a dozen things they think, or maybe 100. Or maybe even 1,000. Who cares? But the thing is, they can only think those things and nothing else. The man goes, no, that's not true. And you understand, that is proof right there. Because it just said, all right, I heard you, I entertained what you said, I pondered it, and it's not true. Because if it was true, I couldn't say it was not true. And it doesn't have to specialize in formal logic. They don't have to get into that kind of mathematical sort of response. It's just everyone's mind adequately, and to them, in a valid fashion, will respond, no, that's not true. And you say, yeah, it is. And a mind is prone to say, well, nah. The truth is, the mind is almost as limitless and infinite as the universe. Because I can think of things that's not even true. I can picture, right now I can picture an opera singer given a big thing, and suddenly he sprouts little wings and a snout, and he begins to fly above the stage. And then flies away. I can actually picture that, like a great finale. And the man's mind can say to you, all right, that shows I can not only, that my mind has a freedom, that you're denying it, it has a freedom. I can think of things that cannot be, and yet my mind can actually picture it. And so I can just dismiss and say, that's just insanity. If there is any example, would say an ordinary mind, of freedom, of an existence without restraint, without limitations, it is the human mind. We cannot even physically and technically catch up with what we imagine. Sometimes what we imagine. Look at Leonardo's brother-in-law. Well, everybody looks at Leonardo and gives him credit, but his brother-in-law was also sketching things and making up things. Well, Leonardo's stuff, like a helicopter and et cetera, it only took like, 450 years, and they developed it. But his brother-in-law drew some pictures that we still hadn't. They're not open to public viewing, but just trust me that his mind, well, I don't want to get into gossip. Anyway, he could think of things and sketch things that we still cannot do. It will strike everyone. And if you are interested, I bet, figuratively speaking, I'll bet that all of you who've done any in the past reading in the area of mysticism, of Sufism and Zen and all sorts of things, you have read poets, prophets, would-be mystics throughout the ages in different ways. The Bible is in Jesus' mouth. A lot of the Old Testament prophets, you just didn't look at it in a certain way, but are saying that very thing, that it suddenly strikes them, and sometimes it's very pithy, but they don't use my kind of words, the terms I'm using, but it's they look around and realize, my head's in a vice. And they're not talking about migraines. It strikes them. No matter what I do, it is like I've only got just 2 or 3 main thoughts. I was just being silly, if not charitable, to talk about people have 100 or 1,000. I just didn't want to argue with you, because if you start talking to an ordinary man and you say, well, you only got 10 things you can think about, he'd immediately go off. That's nuts on the surface. And you say, well, maybe 100. You go, nah. So just to make it, if you wanted to keep the conversation, you have to go, all right, probably in your case, as hip and sophisticated as you, I will go above the average. It's, we're probably talking the tens of thousands. Then they might go, all right, well, go ahead. I'll listen to the number's not even worthwhile. I had a man tonight told you the truth. He said that if you can count to 2, you can count to 3. And if you can count to 3, you can count to 4. And if you can count to 4, forget it. Because the point is, if you can count to 4, then you realize that you can't even count past 2 normally. So then the whole question is moot. That's like in the middle of my road, where I am a dunderheaded, one-eyed, sphincter-puckered Philistine. Can I count to 2? Up to 2 things? I have 2 main things in life to answer me, or 200,000? It is moot. I mean, it is truly moot. It doesn't matter. But it will strike everyone, one way or the other, of how confined your mind is. That your thoughts just go over and over and over. And I know that people will say, yeah. And people even seek psychiatric counseling on the basis that I have what amounts to an idée fixe in my head. And I just keep doing the same things. I keep complaining, reliving some scene that happened in my childhood, or replaying some insult of which I was a recipient. And that goes on and on and on. I know people say that. But see, they look at that as being an anomaly. And it's not an anomaly. That is the natural state of man's awareness, the natural state of his mind. And it will strike every would-be mystic somewhere, finally, that, Jesus, I am living in a straitjacket. I have what should be silly putty in a metal jacket, in a sense. But for those of you that liked that one the other night but didn't have any idea what it meant, I'm glad that little brief re-notice cleared it up. That you realize my brain, my mind, here it is. I'm staying out on the bow of a ship. I'm an air traffic controller. I run a lighthouse. I drive a taxi. I run traffic court. I am here. I'm a surveyor. I'm a farmer. How about this? I'm a cosmologist. Here I'm open to the whole universe. I travel around. I see different people all day. I have all kinds of different sounds and smells come into my cab or where I work. The airplane's in and out. I'm a baggage handler. I'm surrounded by different people. Continual input of stimuli. If they had any ability to think, to be aware of themselves, they'd be aware that it doesn't matter whether you're a cosmologist studying each night the vastness of infinity, at least the universe, or a man in a cab, a man who drives a real profession, a gear jammer, man driving those big 18-wheelers all over the country, new truck stops every day, new wrecks on the highway, new waitresses at the new truck stops. It would seem like that their life is just open to a cornucopia of various new, exotic influences. But if you got in a man's mind, he is as much a kind of confined thinking as some guy who lives by himself, works in a toll booth, or what would be worse, a night janitor. That is, a man who seems to have no outside particular unusual stimuli available. So it strikes everyone that my mind might as well be a knot. My mind is as small, my mind is as confined, and it is a shock. Even after I say it, and I know damn well there are people here, even watching on TV, that go, I know all that, why do you keep laying on that? I know that your mind will do things. I get singing a song and do it over and over and over. But see, they'll always pick out an example. The same way someone seeking counseling, they look at it as being an anomaly. That, well, yeah, it happens. Which again is the mind, well, life, of course, originally, but looking after itself in a way that makes Batman's concern over Robin look perhaps even non-perverted. I don't want to go into it, but life knows how to look after man's mind. Because if you start pointing out things that are true about the mind, and you really start to get it, do you notice any of you who didn't like it tonight or didn't get it, that when you're in real bad position, I mean to the point that you can't even kick a field goal, you can always lap back in to pulling out the personal anecdote or confession play. You always look for examples. You start attacking the mind, or what the mind takes to be an attack, of me saying how limited the mind is. And it can always pull an example. I talk about it, you just keep doing the same thing over and over, and it will, in a manner that is just, it makes Houdini and Blackstone and those guys look like they're spastic. Because the mind immediately goes, oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, I get a song title going, they'll go over and over. Yeah, it'll drive you crazy. When what you were saying is you were speaking universally. No, they'll pick out a specific example and play mea culpa. Yeah, that does happen sometimes. I didn't say sometimes. And if you keep pushing it, which would be silly to an ordinary mind, and they go, well, I heard you, I know what you mean. Sometimes you'll start singing a song over and over and over. And I go, no. You're just picking out a specific example. That is the natural, everyday operational state of the mind, all of your days. And then the mind can go, come on. I mean, I admit it, I know what you're talking about on a specific basis. It'll play personal anecdotes. It'll look at whatever you're talking about. If it felt as though one of those shots somehow ricocheted and may have hit them in the back of the thigh or the calf, it's like what you do is you admit to a small error, or as we would say in certain realms of a religion I don't go into, is you will admit to a small sin to cover up this humongous sin, which is living in a very low state of consciousness. So you didn't know that was a sin. That's why I couldn't tell you what the name of the religion was. So the mind will protect itself again and admit, well, yeah, it happens. No, it doesn't happen. That's it. Someone struggling, back to, they will first, at some time, it'll hit them, God, my mind, if nothing else, me thinking the same things over and over and over, not these exemplary, not these sort of undeniable, galloping merry-go-rounds of thought of a song title or some insult that you received or something, but that your mind itself, all you got to do is take this song title, when something's wrong with my baby, when something's wrong with my baby. 5 or 6 words, just stretch it out a little bit, just a little bit, and you've got what? The natural operations of your mind for In women's case, 72.3 years. A man, 69.6. There it is. Just take that song title. It seemed to be an anomalous example, an exception to your natural, fairly controlled and open state. Take that one example that an ordinary mind will admit to, stretch it out a little bit. Double it, triple it if you really like things on a large scale, and you have got the lifetime operations of an average man's mind. So that will strike you, and then the next thing that's going to strike you is very shortly after that, aha, now I see for myself what could be, and perhaps should be, the ultimate method to use. I don't need to go find somebody to teach me to meditate or to give me some prayer or to find some drug. All I've got to do, I see right now, is just stop myself from thinking the same thing over and over. It's just stop it. And you can look at it from several ways, like expand it. Every time I do it, stop it. Try to think the opposite. Try to think something next to it. Try to turn it upside down. I don't have to let anybody know it, but as soon as I catch myself, there I am, it's not doing anybody any harm, it's not going to hurt anything, and that you look around and you see something happening in life or on TV, and your mind, you go, rah, 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 and you start carping at it, you go, up, there it is, and you try to turn it over like, well, that's not so bad, or that could be good. And it might not do anything, see, it's not going to hurt anybody, and no one's even going to know it if you do it. And so you can decide. This is very common throughout the ages, that people, they describe it in various ways, which I could suggest is where meditation and prayer originally came from, but they see, wait a minute, I now know what to do. I don't have to go find somebody. I don't have to go out and dance and whirl or torture myself. I can do this constantly, and nobody even knows it. I don't have to shave my head or grow my hair or paint my face. I don't have to belong to anything. There's no doubt, if I could interfere, if I could start breaking this thing up and expand it in some way and open it up, that's it. That's the method. That may not be the state, think such people, but there's what to do. Sad to say after that, even if you stick with the remembrance of that's the thing to do, then you got a long way of like, well, goddamn, how come I can't remember to do it? Now back to this. Instead of just civilization, instead of just speaking of the collective, which is still true that we have the civilization, the middle class, the stable part, the collective reality of man is that middle of the road right there. It's like nice and level, no great bumps. If it gets too bumpy and uneven, the middle of the road moves over to another area. The rise and falls of civilizations. But on one side, now into the mind, that middle of the road is you. Is, for those of you who like it, one of the real slimy, unpredictable tricks that's amazing anybody gets this far, because most would-be mystics fall off into one of those ditches. In other words, to be a real mystic eventually, you got to stop being a would-be mystic, but it would seem as though a would-be mystic is the real rebel. Sometimes I even use the term. But you can't really be a rebel. You're living, even when you don't know it, you're genetically born living in two worlds. More than that, but two worlds. One of them is you are a wild-eyed, fiery-eyed rebel, a disruptor of everything decent and orderly, and yet, equally, you have got to at least be able to play out and go along with the role of a fairly good burger, a boob, a middle-class Philistine. You have got to. I might also refer you back. Nobody seems to, well, would-be mystics don't like the story and they just ignore it. But I'm just right quick, just refer you back to the well-known, the greatest apparent intellectual religion, revolutionist, intellectual rebels known to the public, and that is the founders of all the world's religions. Now I know somewhere along the way the stories, they get in trouble sometimes, like Jesus and etc. But notice they all started out as middle-class boobs. They were decent people, had a job. Nobody thought they were all that weird. You've got to be able to do both. The reason is you've got to have the middle of this road. There's got to be a kind of sympathetic sanity in you, that you've got to be able to look around. You've got to be past the point of wanting to live, that you have fallen in either one of those two ditches on the side of the road, the uneven places, that you did not become a criminal, you did not become such a rebel, so disruptive that you could never deal with life as it is. And on the other hand, I know I hadn't been on it much, but it is a slight variation. If you're going to fall off one side, become a rebel, it is a kind of criminal thought. That is, you are literally opposed to the middle of the road. Now, it can just come out in the form of criticism. You can just pick it, or you're always complaining. And it can get to the point of absolute condemnation that something should be done. The whole world, we're just being run by a bunch of big old fat-ass bankers. They don't care about decency. They don't care about art and important stuff. They don't care about us poor people. Probably what we should do is just, if we had enough people like me, we'd just get together and we'd go burn down the damn place. We'd burn down City Hall. In other words, it varies from going like criticism, but you just continually carping at life. Nobody does anything right. It's just obvious. They're just a bunch of idiots. All the way from that to really condemning, not just individual behavior, just condemning the whole thing, and then even to destruction, if you could do it. Now that is a whole ditch, and many people never leave that. And when I say criminal thinking, it does not mean by any means that they engage in such overt behavior as to be put away. The further out you get to the extreme, that can happen, and will happen if you go out far enough. But just along the edge of the road, civilization has always been full of them. On the other side is a slight variation, and people attempt to do this. It's one of the reasons that would-be mystics get involved with drugs and etc. Because they believe, no matter what they say, but they get the sensation, not without some validity at a small, ephemeral level, that certain kinds of drugs can release the mind. Which, it doesn't seem to doubt you can get high off, stoned off psychedelic drugs. Everybody knows this, or at least you've heard it, and you can turn around and not only think just sort of out of the ordinary. I mean, you can turn around and think so out of the ordinary, just according to how stoned you are, can begin to scare you. Like you finally ask your friend, is it just me, or is the weave of the carpet beginning to wink at us? And it seems like not only that, but now I believe I hear that backing beginning to say something. That it does, in a sense, seem to relieve the kind of constraints on normal thinking. But in general, I was going to call it insane thinking as opposed on the other side. And when I say opposed, it's not the two are in conflict, you understand, but I'm drawing the three-dimensional spatial picture that there's the middle of the road, but you're surrounded. Civilizations are, that is, man collectively, and you individually in your own mind. You're surrounded on one side by that which would be critical, condemning, even potentially destructive thought, and then on the other side is almost irrational thought, insane thought. That is, that you try to think things, or you do think things, that just, it denies any of the validity of the middle of the road's reality. See, that's opposed to the criminal. They're not denying. They turn around and say, well, we see the bankers or the rich, the fat cats or whoever, we see that they're in power, and I see the middle of the road. In fact, that's the problem. We've got to do something about it. At least I'm going to bitch about it. I'm not going to stand here passively and put up with it. And if I had more wherewithal, I'd go out there and fight it. Whereas on the other side, the insane thought is more on the basis that they won't even admit that the middle of the road is necessarily reality. That's the ones that end up being what is commonly referred to usually as the mystics or the occultists of the world, or New Agers. And of course, going out far enough, you actually do become insane as judged by the middle of the road, and they will also put you away. They'll just take you away from society. But the ideas you're dealing with are ideas that are not just an attack upon the reality of the middle of the road. It is almost a denying that their reality is even reality. Neither will get you anywhere. Under ordinary conditions, if we're back now talking about externally, about people collectively, we all know there are coffee houses all over the world. In fact, coffee house is a good roundup example. They're full of both. But the societies, the major cities of the world, the hearts of civilization right now, in the cities are sizable numbers. We all know they used to be called the Bohemian section, the hippie section. Now I don't know what they'd be called, but the artistic community. And there'd be people sitting around, if it was years ago, drinking espresso, smoking cigarettes in long holders, discussing Sartre, discussing existentialism, and everybody trying to figure out how in the hell can you say it with a straight face, wearing berets. And they are rebelling, in a sense. They are opposed to the middle class. Now let's speed it up again. We can say they're opposed to the middle class and society out there collectively. But what they're really opposed to is the middle class in their brain, in their mind, in their consciousness. And so they can sit there, and you've got everywhere on this planet at any given time a fair number You don't have to go out looking. It's not down into the ones or twos or the dozens. You will find whole groups. As always, the people collect together, have mutual interests, but you will find a criminal thinking element, an overtly critical element of the middle of the road of their society, and you will also find those that is more of an irrelevant. See, one of them represents, at least verbally, they don't have to do it physically, but they represent an attack on the middle. That's the criminal element, the criminal thinking. The other side represents an apparent irrelevancy to the middle. That they can say, well, we will never amount to anything until our fine brothers and sisters from the galaxy of Nukra actually come here in greater force. I mean, of course, they've been telling me privately that the day is coming. They just won't tell me exactly when, but then, at least by God, things will be straightened out. It's not just that, of course. The religious, to whatever degree it affects their thinking beyond a Saturday or Sunday or Tuesday night involvement therewith, it represents the same thing. That is, it's a otherworldly thinking that the middle of the road, reality as we see it now, or as they see it, is not actual reality. And it's not just the basis of criticizing, which over on the side I was calling the criminal or the political element, they would actually, in an extreme case, destroy the middle of the road. That there's the problem, the middle of the road, the bourgeoisie's, the boob's idea of reality, the Philistines' concept of what is reality, there's the problem, and if we had the wherewithal, we would just destroy it and put up the right structure of reality. We'd start all over and do it right. Whereas on the other side, which is more the artistic, otherworldly, religious, kind of irrelevant thought, they just treat the middle of the road like, they wouldn't even destroy it, it's like God will take care of it. The people from the galaxy, whatever I said, will finally come down and straighten it all out. Or, carried a little bit further, the person in the privacy of their own little brain can get to the point that they, according to how far it goes, they can begin to, as psychiatry would call it, personally hallucinate. They don't necessarily go around criticizing, maybe joining up with others, because it's easier for artistic and political rebels to form a group than it is nutty people, in case you ever noticed. You have a problem when you got insane people trying to get them to join up, pay their dues or be there Wednesday at such time. It's easier just to deal with political rebels if you're trying to lead a group. I mean, I just throw it out for free. If you just announce, I'd like all people who believe that you have serious mental problems and have strange dreams and hear voices, I'd like to start a club. Would you be here Tuesday at such and such time? You see, leave it to you to figure out why or how. Or to go look in the mirror and ask yourself, why would I want to hit a club like that? You have now in your own brain, and none of this has, I know, much meaning. It has no real feel until you personally see yourself that the day will strike you, and I could go into a little more dramatics, but I am serious. It will strike you, and it's a shock, and you knew it verbally, you knew it theoretically. But it's going to hit you in the world of experience, and you'll feel it right here, and it's like, my God. The size of my intellectual universe right now, and I'm well-read, I'm hip, I'm sophisticated, I got talent in several fields, you can say, and I suddenly realize the breadth, the width of my thinking is about the size of a good Parisian model's bust. The size of my thinking, my universal, my conception, what goes through my mind would fit into a pea. It is a shock. But almost a relief immediately after that, because then you go, well, after all of this, after hearing all this and all the thinking, reading I've done in my life, I should have known it. I knew that to begin with. Right now, some way I'm going to stop this. See, tonight I threw in, for those that didn't get it, was a definition. Meditation, a road with nowhere to go. Then there was a second, useful meditation. Same, except the meditator knows it. The second one, is what I'm referring to now, that if you get past, you do see that my mind might as well be in a little straitjacket, might be inside of a pea that's armor-plated. That's the extent of my intellectual vistas. Take it in toto, not one example, that's it. Then to say, I've got to let it go, that's like useful meditation, because there are no specifics. Let it go how? Right. Did I miss something? Probably. You go, what? All right, I'll put it to you this way. A man can go, if he heard this, he can go, you're right. What I should do is expand my thinking. And then he starts thinking, well, in what areas? You can't be specific. See, then you're trapped again. You can't even kick a punt, and you're falling back upon personal anecdote. You're falling back on specifics. Let's see, I'm going to expand my thinking. And if I was hovering around, being the hovering kind of mystic, his mother, mystic, hovers around, and he says, if I could expand my thinking. And she goes, in what ways? And he goes, well, I've always been, I don't know, kind of uptight about different religions. Good place to start. No, it's not. It's a road that goes it has nowhere to go. It is that's why you can feel as though, and I was using this kind of picturization, that you are surrounded, that you find yourself, here I am. I'm still, God knows why, sane enough to get by. And most people that know me, including my parents and people that used to think I was weird, they're kind of used to it. I can go pass a driver's test, I can pay my taxes, and yet I have never actually gone fully back into bed. I have never fully accepted this. I'm still working on it. And it strikes you that here's the bed. This is the only place I have to attack. Changing my diet, meditating, whirling down my head. It may be fun, it may be a hobby. My mind, my intellect, my consciousness is right where it was when I was 17 years old. I've dumped a little more junk in it, but it's the same crowd. It's the same blender. It goes no farther else. It bounces off the same walls. It might as well be that big. And you feel like, now I'm getting somewhere. What I've got to do is be able to move it. But it's as though, I know I drew down gullies, but it's as though there you're on this plane and you go, that's it. Here's where I am. Now I got to leave. But it's like on each side are mountains all around. And on one side you're surrounded, and on one side you've got criminal thinking in you. Critical thinking. Condemning thinking. And around on the other ridges up here, you've got irrelevant thinking. And you can then spend the rest of your life feeling like you're having to fight off one or the other. Or, worse than that, think, well, I'll go up in the hills and join them. Because at least I won't be here. They got the right idea. At least the rebels up here on this side, at least they're critical. They see that something's wrong. And plus this other side, they got ideas that are so strange. Whew. So you can end up on one of the ridges. Which, to leave on a positive note, I'd like to point out, will do you no good whatsoever. Well, it saved you from climbing up there. That is, you'll listen to me. Or just as well as save you from shooting off those blanks that don't even exist that you carry around thinking that's ammo anyway. Sometimes known as rebuttals, personal opinion, rectifying observation. Amongst us real mystics is known as palaver. Or to be, so that you don't have to look it up, talk. Talk. Any response to any other common response is firing off this ammunition that you believe you own, that you possess, but if you'll note, the rebels are still surrounding you up here. You're not short in, and you've been firing at them forever.